and welcome to the National World War II Museum's podcast series, Service on Celluloid. Each week, our in-house experts sit down with special guests to discuss depictions of World War II on film. Sit back and get ready for a lively debate that will reveal the good and bad of how Hollywood shows the 20th century's most dramatic event. My name is Seth Paradin, historian and digital content manager here at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. And as always, we're sitting down with
Dr. Christelle Lefaucheur, research historian at the Institute for the Study of War and Democracy.
And today our special guests are Kaylee Martin, historian and research assistant here at the museum.
Hi, everyone.
And Patrick Stephen, the Gary Sinise oral historian here at the World War II Museum.
Hello.
Today we'll be discussing the 1992 film A League of Their Own. The film focuses on the story of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, the women's professional baseball league founded by gum magnate Philip K. Wrigley in 1942 when minor league teams were hurting for talent as men were being drafted to serve in World War II. A League of Their Own was directed by Penny Marshall and written by Mark Mandel and Lowell Gantz. It stars Gina Davis, Tom Hanks, Madonna, Rosie O'Donnell, and Lori Petty. The film was a box office and critical success, and in my opinion is a hysterical film. So one of the questions that we always start with here is how accurate these movies are. And Kaylee, because you're sitting next to me here to my right, I'll ask you first. In your opinion, how accurate is A League of Their Own?
I think that a lot of the details with the uniforms and things like that are good. Overall, I think it captures the spirit of the league and what the league was about in that first year. But really getting down to accuracy, it's off. And I know that Patrick and I have a lot of things to say about that. But to start with, the first year they were actually playing softball. Mm-hmm. And they're depicted as playing baseball, overhand pitch, those types of things. And that didn't actually come along for several years into the league's history.
That was something that was, when it first started, like if you really look at the movie, when they went to go recruit Dottie and her sister Kit, they were playing softball, right? Mm-hmm. Underhand, and then magically they're playing overhand. And so that type of transition wasn't really conveyed that well. Mm-hmm. Historically, accuracy, I'd say 70%. I mean, it got the gist, but they took the title of All-American Girls Professional Baseball League that was given to them in 88 and then used now in 43, which wasn't the case. Mm-hmm. That's fine. It still got it. I'd say, 70%. I'd stay with that.
Yeah, there's a long evolution of the game. I mean, they started with the overhand pitch because softball was an incredibly popular pastime. And as people didn't have entertainment in the home, a lot of people got out and they loved to play games. And so the girls actually were used to playing softball, so the underhand pitch style you see. And it took a few years, they switched to the sidearm pitch. And it wasn't until late in the 40s that they actually started pitching overhand, I think.
You ever try to throw a softball overhand? It's not easy. You have to use 3 fingers on top instead of 2. And I tried doing that when I was playing softball a long time ago. And it hurts your elbow. I had elbow tendonitis for a while. What I'm saying is that transition, they had a 12-inch ball. You can't throw that overhand with the speeds of which they were accepted.
Yeah.
So with that, it was when I first saw that, I was like, okay, well, that's why you notice the ball started getting smaller as years went on. It was until like 44, it went down from 12 to 10 inches, and then they kept moving down.
I think it wasn't until their last year that they used a 9-inch ball like pro baseball does.
By then, they were... But at that same time, the base paths were even closer. Because before, it's still like, 90 feet between first and second all the way around.
Right.
In the movie, it made it look like it was 90 feet, but really, at the time, it was 55. And it didn't progress until later on. So, yeah, those are little things that, the little details that would kind of, you'd pick up on after you watch it 3, 4, 5 times. But the first or second time, you're like, okay, I like the nostalgia of the whole thing.
It gives the impression, the movie gives the impression that this was a replacement for professional baseball in Major League Baseball, and it wasn't.
No,
it was not. It was never intended to be. And like you said, Pat and Kaylee, they're shown throwing overhand pitch, fast pitch baseball, and from someone who's played baseball, that's not an easy thing to go from is underhand to overhand and stuff like that, and it gives the impression that the baseball diamonds were the regulation sizes and things like that, and they weren't. And so, I mean, as far as accuracy is concerned, in the terms of the history of this particular sport, I would say that it's loose, to say the least. I think you were extremely generous at saying 70%. I'd say maybe 30.
I would. The only reason why I gave it that is because it's the effort they put into the little details. It's the billboards.
Yeah.
It's when they finally go up to the announcer's booth and you look at the background, you can see like the little things I've paid attention to, the stadiums. And those are the things that I gave it a little bit more credit. You're right. You could dissect the play all you want. But that's where I would have given less, but then I watched it again. It's like, oh, okay. They did some research. I got it.
Yeah. What about you, Christelle?
I would agree with Kelly. Not being very familiar with baseball, not being American, I liked the movie, and I thought, like Kelly said, the spirit, this effort to kind of recover the story. I think by '92, when the movie came out, barely anybody knew there was even such a thing that women were playing softball, baseball, however you want to call it in a certain sense, and the role they played during those couple of years during the war. So it's kind of recuperative work of presenting this history and the achievement of this woman at a time where it was difficult and unusual for women to do that. So I think they did a good job doing that and showing some of the conflicts and problems they encountered. So did a good job. Yeah, as far as technicalities and baseball specifics, I pass on the question.
Defer. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the teams. They're in Major League Baseball. I forget how many teams are there in Major League Baseball, Pat? Currently,
32, I believe.
Yeah, there's quite a few, but in the actual league, there were, at least when it began, there were 4.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that is accurately represented in this.
It is.
Yeah.
And the names, the locations, all of that, they get correct. The largest the league ever got was, I think, 10 teams in one season. And teams came and went. But that first season, it was just 4. Now, one thing the movie does do differently is, unfortunately, our beloved Peaches were the worst in the league the first year. They were not in the
First
championship.
and second year, too.
Yeah. So that was a bit of an alteration. I'm not sure why they decided to take that path, but
Rockford, the city where the Peaches were, just celebrated the 75th anniversary of their first game in May, and they put on a big event really about that in the show and the film and everything. So they're very proud. Now, I think really after the film, they started doing that and very proud of this history.
I'll admit this. I cheated. I actually went to the cities last week. I went to Rockford and I went to Racine and Kenosha. And I made that drive. When I finally got there, I was expecting like this massive museum and a whole bunch of stuff. And I think it was the Village of Midway Museum, and it was just a small little area where they had, hey, we had a team here. And I was kind of disappointed. I was like, okay. I walked around. And then I drove to I drove to Racine, which was 2 hours today with the interstate and speed limits. I can imagine what it was like back then. And then I drove the same thing to Kenosha, and it was just like small historical museums that had a small little thing to do with baseball. I tried driving around. I couldn't find anybody else celebrating this.
On the day of? No, I'm talking last May. A couple of months ago.
I know, but like even today, just driving around, because I mean, it is
it's women's sports. What should I say?
I figured because I made the misconception when I was younger, when I first saw this movie, that these teams are all around the United States. I'm thinking they're everywhere. Then I come to realize that they're only within 100 miles of Chicago.
Midwest thing. Yeah.
And then I realized that it's like, well, why didn't they expand more? Why didn't they keep growing? And then I thought about it, and then I remember reading about this, doing my thesis was Major League Baseball had a antitrust clause to where they couldn't be sued because interstate commerce. But that was a league. This was not an official major league. It wasn't endorsed by the league, so it didn't have that type of protection. So that's the reason why their owners didn't want to get involved. They're like, we don't want to get involved with interstate commerce and transfer and this and that. So they just kind of left it alone. And that's why they only stayed in that area. Like they had a little problem with when they went to Minneapolis and then the Minnesota Minarets, but that only lasted 1 year. So that's where I took my big thinking and I finally drilled down. I was like, wow, that's why they never left.
Well, that, and I think, a lot of the teams were Midwest teams. Well, all 4 were Midwest teams because of who founded the league. Philip Wrigley, who, if you know anything about, and even if you don't know anything about baseball, you've heard of Wrigley Field in Chicago, Illinois, home of the Cubs. And, he's not going to send a team to Miami. He's not. It's not going to happen. But it is, I agree with you. I kind of felt like, when I was a kid and I saw this movie that, you kind of feel like the teams are all over the country because you see them on the bus all the time and they're moving around quite a bit.
Yeah.
Which they were
And
probably
really-
on the bus all the time.
Oh, no doubt.
I mean, Patrick said,
No doubt,
they were playing and then driving at night. I mean, it was actually quite taxing for them. I can imagine.
Sure,
No highway.
but it gives the illusion of the teams being spread out. And they're not.
Yeah.
They're really
Yeah.
not.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind with that is one of the other reasons to keep them close is rationing.
That's
So it's
true.
pretty impressive that they could even get the gasoline to drive these buses as far as they did. And that's one of the things about the movie that always makes me laugh too is when Dottie and her husband are going to drive back from Midwest to Oregon and you see their vehicle and it's got an A ration sticker,
Yes.
which means it would have been allowed 4 gallons of gas a week.
It would have taken them about 6 months to get across the country
Let alone stop at Yellowstone and turn around.
because of the bears.
But that is something to think about is the proximity is for travel. The trouble they had traveling any further than that at the time because of rationing.
They were in a Model A, too. So they'd have been lucky to make it that far, even if they had the gas. Ford, found on road dead. But anyway, one of the big things in the movie, at least in the beginning of the movie, is the etiquette of the girls. Or they're trying to instill etiquette in some of these girls, and there's some really funny scenes in there.
My
Marla
favorite.
Hooch, man.
I love Marla. I love Marla.
Suggestion? A lot of night games.
When they're raising their hand and she's just going up and down. That's Marla Hooch is my favorite.
Well, this was a real thing, though. This is something that they really did, and there's a variety of reasons why they did this. But let's talk about this. What do you guys know about the etiquette and the domestic pursuits of these young ladies?
You can actually find them on the web. So the entire text that they were probably given it's separated into clothing, public appearance, and I think just general etiquette. It's fascinating.
Yeah, one of the things that you see a lot, one of the Wrigley's reasons behind this is that it was a marketing ploy. It's more entertaining to watch well-made-up women in makeup with their hair done and skirts playing ball like men than a bunch of girls with their hair pulled back and pants that look like men playing like men. Where's the attraction to that? And this was something to try to make money. At the end of the day, they were entertainers and entertainers as well as athletes. And that brought us this drama to it that he thought would win people over to see these gorgeous girls who can make coffee or love to cook spaghetti dinners. Also, hit a line drive. And, it makes sense when you think about it from a marketing perspective.
Absolutely.
As a ploy.
And I mean, the guy who's, I forget his real name, but in the movie it's Ira Lowenstein. But in the,
Arthur Meyerhoff.
in reality, I mean, he was Wrigley's marketing man.
Yeah.
And he was put in charge of getting this out there and getting it done. One of the things, talk about marketing for this league in reality, in the movie they portray them struggling to get people in the seats in the beginning, and then they start hot dogging and doing splits when they're catching all this kind of baloney. But
Which they were doing.
that's not true that they were struggling to get people in the seats.
Yeah.
Because women's softball, like you said in the beginning, was very, 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 and still is, very, very popular in the 1940s. I mean, it didn't get anywhere near the popularity of Major League Baseball, but in smaller towns and places that didn't have Major League teams, it was very, very popular. So they didn't struggle to get people in the seats at all.
Which actually, that kind of worked double-edged whenever they tried to expand to bigger cities. It didn't work well at all. When they went to Minneapolis, it only went 1 year. Yeah. When they went to Milwaukee, it was only 1 year because the smaller town had that, the whole town bought into it. Like, that's all they had, whereas Minneapolis, they had Major League Baseball, they had other things that take away from them, and that's why they only lasted 1 year. So they realized that the smaller towns actually work. So you're right. It's they sold the town. They sold them to come in, and so there was like a whole big thing whenever they had games.
Yeah, and to that point, they originally started out as All-American Girls Softball League. But that caused a lot of confusion that it was a different league than all these local leagues. So mid-season in 43, they changed their name to the All-American Girls Baseball League. And it changed several times after that. They changed it to the All-American Girls Professional Ball League because then they got called out. Well, they're not really playing baseball. They're playing by baseball rules, but it's, underhand pitch. It's, softball in essence. So you even see that influence of the popularity of softball affecting the name of the league that first season.
Yeah, that was It was one of the things that I noticed. In 43, this was, as all the research you can read about this is something you wouldn't know. So in 42, we have what they call the 42 baseball, and that was still being used. Well, the Japanese at the time had taken over all of the Philippines and Indonesia. Well, that was where a lot of the rubber came from. So the very next year, they brought out what they call the balata ball. And this was Spalding had the exclusive contract to only make baseballs for Major League Baseball. So when they were started running out of the 42 ball, they said, well, listen, you need to come up with another ball. So Spalding was rushing, and they'd use golf ball hides. Anyways, the point I was making was when the balata ball came out, the balata was a terrible substitute to rubber, which was in the inside of the ball. Ball games are ending 1-0, going 15, 16 innings. The ball wouldn't leave the infield. It was atrocious. This was happening at the same time that now this league is coming up that was using a softball, which is a lot bigger and a lot more rubber. And you don't see any of that. You don't see any of that type of transition. So that was one of the things that when I first saw that, I was like, there is absolutely no mention at all of it. The ball's got spring. They're hitting home runs. Like, there's no way that could have happened if they're using a balata ball, which stayed until 44. Then they brought back this hybrid. Then it was okay after that. But Spalding ended up losing their contract. They had a 25-year contract, and it was supposed to be renewed in 46. Major League Baseball said, nope, give us the specs on the baseball, and we'll create our own. And that's where you saw this explosion of like Wilson and all these other brands start doing it themselves. Spalding shot themselves in the foot. And Louisville saw that, and that's why they developed the lighter bat ahead of the rationing. So anyways, when you see that, you don't see how the rationing, because all the bats were made from the Pacific Northwest ash. Well, clearly, they couldn't use it, so they went to like a Tennessee ash, which split more. So they ended up producing more bats to compensate for that. Louisville got ahead of it before Spalding did. You don't see any of this in the movie in terms of rationing. All the Major League Baseball, the majority of the revenue came from gate admissions, not from concessions. All the concessions were third-partied out. So with the gate admissions, that's why they were struggling to bring people in, because that's where they're going to get their money from. The league was funded halfway through Phil Wrigley. He put up his own money. And in 51, when they did the congressional hearing against baseball, he actually told them from 43 and 44 he lost money. But the league did well, and he actually did lose money. And what he was trying to do was they were doing this to keep the league at red line, to keep it going, because they don't know when baseball is going to get shut down. Even though Roosevelt said, I'm going to keep it going in January of 42, he didn't say that's my political stance. He said that's my personal opinion. Mm-hmm. So he didn't have any choice. So,
well, let's talk about Major League Baseball's reaction to this league. How did they look at this? How did the big league ball players look at the girls' league? What did they think?
The owners didn't want anything to do with it at all. It was Phil Wrigley's idea. It was actually, believe it or not, he created a trust fund to a foundation to create this league. And the only other person that jumped in on was Branch Rickey. And they went in together. All the other owners, they didn't want anything to do with it because Phil Wrigley's sole income came from gum. So this was baseball was kind of like, he inherited this team from his father, so he was kind of like, let me try something new. And Branch Rickey, having already created the farm system in the 20s, which all the owners hated, and I was going to break the color barrier in 47, which all the owners hated, Branch Rickey's like, I'll do it. I'll give it a shot. So Major League Baseball didn't want anything to do with it because they were already hiding under their own antitrust. We're trying to barely keep the ship afloat. We don't need to tack on more sailors onto the ship that's already, we think, is going down. So up until then, the minor leagues were almost decimated. There was very little night games, which even though FDR wanted them. So the owners didn't want anything to do with it. Now the players, they left it alone. But as far as I know, they wanted to keep them separate because Philip Wrigley wanted to use the stadiums while the teams were away. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was also
because they were losing money.
Yes, yeah. And that was also a proposal for, at the time, which was the Negro League. They were trying to sell them on that. They're like, listen, if they come in and play, who's going to upkeep? Who's going to man the stadium? Who's going to do all the admission? They're like, you know what? Just leave it alone. We don't want to do that. So they just let the stadiums empty.
Well, a loss on their part for sure, in my opinion. Anyway, well, the movie we've talked a lot about the history of which is fascinating, frankly, to me. But the movie is I wouldn't characterize this as a war film. And we've done in this podcast, we've done, nothing but war films. This is a movie that is set during the war, and there's a difference there. And it's a home front movie, and it's set obviously in the American home front, or on the American home front, and there are references to the war. And Patrick, you mentioned, and we all mentioned here and there, the billboards, and you see a lot of sailors and soldiers and whatnot in the crowd. And a couple of the characters have loved ones in the service, but home front movies are few and far between, and this is one of them. What do you guys think this movie does to both embrace the popular image of the home front and dispel some of the myths? Anybody?
It definitely shows how women were given a lot of opportunities during the war. Mm-hmm. And so not just the Rosie the Riveters, not just a chance to get out into industry, get out to become employed, but and I think one of the really key moments of that is when May says, I'm not going back to taxi dancing, 10 cents a dance. She's like, this is my way out of that. And I think there's some really wonderful real-life examples of that. One that I found was a 15-year-old who joined the league in 1943.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And she started making $125 a week and was able to put herself through college, and she became a medical doctor, all because she was able to play pro baseball, women's pro baseball. And so I think the movie does a good job of showing that thing where it gave women an opportunity, opened doors for these women in small towns. And I think that's indicative of a lot of people. Think about the young Midwestern boy who joins the Navy and finds himself on the other side of the world. And World War II was a time that people saw more than they had ever seen, and that's when you start to see the urbanization afterwards, and people start to go out because, hey, I've seen places, there's something beyond the farm that I grew up on. And I think you get a lot of that in this film, and it's...
I agree. Kit, Lori Petty's character, right at the very beginning, she's trying to convince Dottie to basically take the invitation so she can go with her and get out of that. I forget what the name of the town, Willamette, I think it was. She just wanted to get out of that small town and see the world. And then towards 3/4 or so way through the movie, she starts talking about, or Dottie asks her, "Are you going to come home? You going to come?" And she's like, "I like it here." Mm-hmm. And one would assume that area is Chicago or Rockford or whatever it may be. But yeah, I agree with you that it certainly helped women see the world, and men too. But one of the myths I think that we had talked about earlier was that there are a lot of servicemen in the stands, but there's a lot of male civilians in the stands too that are not in uniform. Mm-hmm. And the popular myth is that everybody joined the service. Everybody you either volunteered or you drafted. There wasn't a single male between the ages of 18 and 35 that wasn't in a uniform. That is bull. That is not the case at all whatsoever. We were saying that I know veterans, and we all probably know veterans that were of age in 1944, and they waited until they were drafted because they had absolutely no intentions of serving. And that's a popular myth of the, quote, greatest generation, unquote. And I'm not doing anything to dispel that. And believe me, few people would. But it's a fact that, not everybody was willing to join the United States military. Not everybody was a flag-waving, blueberry pie-eating American boy. And I think when you don't necessarily notice that in this movie, and maybe only dorks like us would because we're looking for stuff like that, but if you do know the history and you see that, it kind of makes you start to wonder, and you're starting to put two and two together. So that kind of, in my opinion, that dispels one of the myths of the American home front in World War II.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's interesting. Also, that two of the characters mentioned their husbands or boyfriends being out of work, and I think that's another thing that people think of. There was work to be had. Everyone had a job. And there was still unemployment during the war, but I think one of the things that people don't realize is a lot of this war work, factories would hire employees for a contract. That contract's up. You have to lay everyone off or lay off X number of employees, and they've got to wait till another contract comes through.
That's right.
Even our own local shipyards had to do the same thing. They had to lay people off in between big contracts. And that's something we think that's just... Yes, there was an abundance of work. The unemployment rate plummeted as the war ramped up. But it was not always steady, solid work for people. And I thought it was interesting that they actually capture that in the film.
But to follow up on what Seth was saying, in the same way that you have different types of men represented, you have Dottie's husband who goes to war, you have the one that stays home and do not want to go to war. You also have, for me, one of the strengths of the movie was the variety of women that are represented. You have mothers with kids, you have married women that are waiting for their husband, you have women that are probably treated pretty badly by their husband. I mean, there's an indication of, domestic violence. You have women that, want to go out and discover life and want to dance and want to drink and want to do all kinds of things, enjoy life in this weird moment that war is. And I think they did a really good job of doing that. Like this aspiration that is perfectly normal for a young man, but for women is really judged almost suspiciously. Like you must be, an unmoral woman. And one of my favorite scenes is very short, is when you have the head of the Women League of I don't know what not speaking on the radio.
Oh,
and
yeah.
saying, lose, woman, and, they're going to lose. I mean, it reminds me 19th century when they were making an argument that higher education for women was really bad because the blood going to their brain will prevent them from having babies. So basically we have something like that, and it's 1943. So I thought that it's a feminist movie, really making a point, a case about the ambitions, or not even ambitions, it's just aspiration that young women have, and the restriction from society. So,
if you don't mind, I want to throw a wrinkle in all of this.
The wrinkle.
Of course you do.
Of course. So you mentioned males in the stands that were not in the service. Have you not noticed that every game in the movie was during the day?
Yeah.
That's not the case.
Yeah.
They spent the majority of them at night.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they did that on purpose, was so that way the average American could work and then have something to do at night, which is not conveyed, because you would think somebody has nothing to do. The only time they really did have day games, which was Sunday. And usually the prices were doubled around that time to go watch them. But that was one of the stipulations that FDR asked for whenever he put the green light letter, was I would like more night games. And which was weird because Chicago area, the Cubs, they didn't have lights until 88. So you're thinking, like, why is the team that owns other teams that play night games, which were done in minor league ballparks, doesn't have lights in there, which was ironic because in 43, they actually played an all-star game. I think it was Kenosha and Racine, I think. And they played it in Wrigley Field. And they think, okay, my first thought was lights, Wrigley Field. They brought in portable lights. They put them behind home plate, first and third, and then one in the outfield. And they said that the girls couldn't see anything because they had so many shadows. They're like, we're just happy to be at Wrigley Field. They made all kinds of errors, but nobody cared. So this was the very first night game at Wrigley Field. But going back to my point is all the games in the movie are day games.
Yeah.
Even in the World Series, it was all day games. Like they act like nobody had anything else to do. But
For a week.
yes, yeah. So to the wrinkle is yeah, they probably worked, but if they showed a night game, it would be more applicable because they worked during the day. But you wouldn't see that based upon the movie.
And it's way more difficult to shoot at night.
It is.
And that's the main reason they shot during the
Oh,
day. It's way easier to have really nice shots.
I mean, yeah, you can
Shooting at night is a nightmare.
And my understanding was that Penny Marshall made them just play, and they filmed it so they would have a lot of B-roll of games to insert where needed. So they spent a lot of time on the field. And also, if we're talking about that quickly, like all the injuries you see are real.
Yeah.
Really?
And they
I
had
did not
like
know that.
a 7.5 months training by a
Yeah.
professional, and 2,000 women auditioned to play, and they were only going to hire them if they could throw and catch a ball. That were the two stipulations. The rest we can teach you, but you have to have some sort of coordination.
They were 9 months behind schedule because they couldn't find people that could coordinate that type of mechanics that you know I are probably used to, but they have to act at the same time as kind of show that it's real.
Yeah.
Because I think at the time, the Dottie Henson, Gina Davis, was not the primary person to play that role.
Correct.
So there was others. So she was a last-minute type thing. She had no baseball skills whatsoever and would work with a private trainer on the side to learn how to throw accurately and catch accurately. So that was the other side of it is the girls in this league, they didn't worry about acting. They worried about playing, whereas now the actors have to do both because you have to sell them on it.
And you can tell too. You can tell if you've ever thrown a ball on a team. There's a certain form that you have, and there's a certain velocity with which you throw the ball, and the arm is in a certain motion and everything else. And there's a lot of those. Some of the main actors in the movie, when you see them throw, you're like, that ball's not going more than 15 feet in front of you. Damn sure ain't going from outfield to second base.
Well, my favorite scene is when they do the tryout, because first of all, there's also how they're dressed. You can almost pinpoint them geographically. I mean, I know they're supposed to be all in the north, in the west, whatever
they recruited from around the country.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. So it's kind of interesting. They dress differently, and then there's this young woman who doesn't know how to read, which is also very common.
Which would been accurate.
And for me, the movie is full of this really little details that are very, very accurate for the time period. Maybe not in terms of throwing a baseball ball, but those little things,
Well, no, I mean, Patrick was right when he said that and you are as well, Christelle, when you said that the little details are accurate in the background, And that's one of the topics that we were going to talk about. We've already kind of covered it. Is the like the billboards for the bonds and the advertisements for whatever Coke or whatever it was that you see in the stadium, and it is accurate for that time. So that part of the movie I thought was very well done. But
I think it was also the outside of the game, the way they were dressed when they went out to the clubs, the way they're dressed at that era, the
buses,
even exactly.
I'm impressed that they had buses.
The buses were like
buses that ran.
And then if you saw a bus like that, and then it took me 2.5 hours today to get that distance, I can imagine a bus like that. That's why they would say, remember at the end of the movie, we're saying, oh, I'm going to miss all this, putting on all this equipment and driving all night and doing doubleheaders in the heat. It was true. I think they had to do like 108 games in 110 days. They had 4 days off. So
man, that is hustling.
You do double the games, drive all night long. You're probably sleeping on the bus, and that's why they did one day, one night, and then you got to do it again, and then again, and again, and again. So that's why. Yeah, you're right. The buses were just. I saw that.
Well, it's a lot like it remind. I'll be honest with you. A lot of the scenes that they're moving back and forth on the buses and whatnot reminded me of minor league ball, and I'm not talking AAA. I'm talking like single A and double A ball, where especially single A, where they are essentially a farm. It is a farm team, but it is essentially Lukash Dairy, team. I mean, these guys are out there and they're doing the silly, goofy bat races during the seventh inning stretch and stuff like that. And they are riding around on buses, and they're not getting on private Lear jets and going from Baltimore to Minneapolis or wherever it may be. It reminds me a lot of single A ball. If you've ever been to a single A ball game, it's very similar to this.
It is. I like how they had a chaperone too to kind of keep them in that
chaperone.
Which is accurate.
It is. It is
accurate.
And a lot of players became chaperones, and they were more successful at it because they understood what it was like to be the player. Because a chaperone had to be kind of equal parts guardian, mother, first aid, medic. They had to treat a lot of the injuries, and so they had to deal with all these different aspects of these young women that are away from home for the first time, and it was a real challenge for the chaperones.
That was also based upon Major League Baseball, because you had that player, manager, owner type thing, to where that actually bled all the way up until the 70s and 80s, and then of course free agency traded, and then that kind of did away with it. But yeah, you're right. It's easier to have somebody that's with the ball club all the time and also do managerial stuff. So, but yeah, you're right. You see pictures of players, like I think Dorothy Kamenchek, the one that they actually did the. Based upon Dottie Henson's character, and she played 9 years, but in her 9th year she became a chaperone, and she said it was awkward at first to sit on the bench not to play, but then she got used to it, and all the players respected her, and that's the reason why at the end
she'd been there.
Yeah. Well, another one of those teeny tiny scenes is when they're practicing. I think they're practicing or warming up, and the ball rolls off, and you have an African American woman. Throwing it back with a very nice throw. I think it looked like it was a very nice throw.
Form.
Yeah. And again, it's kind of one of those really subtle hint of segregation, of course.
It reminds you what era you're still
watching.
Yeah.
One of the things to that point.
The color, not to cut you off, but just to elaborate on that, the color barrier was never broken with the Girls Baseball League.
No.
Yeah.
No, they actually did have. They did recruit some girls from Cuba. They had a few Cuban players throughout the years.
Yeah, when they did spring training down there. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, But one thing that stood out to me when I watched the movie again is when Ira Lowenstein and Walter Harvey are talking, and Harvey's like, oh, they're going to save baseball. We don't need the league. And he goes, so you're just going to tell these girls they have to go home?
Yes.
And he goes on to say, so is this what it's going to be like in the factories? Thanks, Rosie. Hang up your rivets. Go home. And there's actually a Roper poll where they asked, when factories are deciding which workers to keep in peacetime jobs, what should be done about women war workers? And 48% of the people who responded said they should be fired.
And actually, if I may add, 85% combined say, yes, she should be fired. There was, yes, absolutely. And there was a second one, yes, if they don't have they have a husband or something like that. So it was close to 80%, 85% that says yes. And actually, the numbers I have is that you have 1 million women that were directly laid off after the war, and about 2 other million that left the industry right after. We don't know exactly the reason, but it was pretty clear. I mean, they started making plans already in 1944 as they were making post-war plans. What are we going to do with all this women? And the veterans are coming back. And the fear what happened in 1918, 1919, all those veterans that were unemployed, the bonus march on Washington, that was very present. Absolutely. And you see that in a lot of films with soldiers that are injured or they're thinking about coming back and are really discussing among themselves, oh, I just want to go back and have a little business and things like that. It was very, I'm reading letters right now for biography, and the young man who is 22 talked to his sweetheart, said, as soon as I come, I have to find a job. Hopefully it's going to work well. I'm a little afraid, the Great Depression, blah, blah. As soon as I have a job, we can get married. So it's very present.
One of the best years of our lives.
Yeah.
A movie that was reviewed on this podcast in the first time. Yeah, fantastic, beautiful movie, but it deals with that.
Yeah,
Fred Derry, Dana Andrews, the main character, deals with that very thing. He's a bombardier in a B-17 and a high-ranking one at that, and he comes back and he's a soda jerk.
Yeah.
So, that was very real.
I mean, the idea, the widespread idea is woman belongs in the house. Mm-hmm. I mean, the war completely fractured that. They needed the government actively recruit them, encourage them through propaganda, through films, through everything to either work for some services, some work or some other things, some women's services, Red Cross, or even more directly in the factories. There's a lot of posters about women, come and work in the factory. But it was never for long term. As Kelly was saying earlier, like the same thing with men, it's a contract work. After that, go back to the house and take care of our veterans.
And Lowenstein even says that. He goes, what are we going to say? When the men come back, send them back to the kitchen. And Harvey responds, what do we do? Tell the boys returning to war from war to get into the kitchen?
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that they put that in there because that also makes it so incredible that the league survived until 1954. When you think about that, what it started as and kind of the purpose behind it. And it really arguably was only found its demise because of television as one of the big reasons given to it is that there wasn't as much of a demand to go and watch sports because now suddenly people can watch sports in their living room.
Sit on your sofa and watch sports.
Well, there was also a big thing that nobody really – in 1951, there was a congressional hearing against baseball. Because now, after the war, this shift of personnel moved from the Midwest and they went out. And they went out west. They went to Seattle, L.A., San Francisco, Houston, like that whole belt. And so now these cities were big enough to house a team. And they asked Major League Baseball, hey, listen, we want a team. And all the owners are like, oh, well, we're fine. They just kind of crossed arms like, we're not leaving here. And so they sued Major League Baseball. But you can't sue Major League Baseball because they're protected. But so they had the congressional hearings in 1951, and that started it. Now, they couldn't tell baseball what to do. So in the end, they finally said, listen, you're going to have to regulate yourself, but you need to do it quickly. A few years later, what happens? The very first team, Boston Braves, are like, we want a new stadium. Boston says no. We're like, all right, we're out. And they split. And then that just started the domino. So the shift went from this Northeast America, and all of a sudden went everywhere else. What got lost in there was the baseball, the All-American Girls Baseball League, because they got stuck in the Chicago area, and everybody was transitioning, and they were like, there's this rediscovering. Now people in L.A. are like, now they're rooting for the Dodgers. They don't have to look for other teams, and now that they got lost in that transition. So you're right, TV was huge into that, but I think that the 51 hearing started the kind of that domino of breaking that Northeast. We've got this our own league type thing with the owner's mentality. Now America can share. They forgot to share this league. So I
They
just want to add to
forgot.
that.
They forgot.
Well, let's move on a little bit. Let's talk about the film itself. There's no baseball was pushed out. Well, I guess this is the film and history combined. Baseball was pushed out during the war as being quintessentially American, and it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was, it still is. Why do you think that is? Why do you think baseball? I mean, you know, the U.S. Army and the Navy had issue baseball gloves and bats, and you know, the boys overseas were encouraged to play ball in their downtime, what little downtime they may have had, depending on what they were doing. Why do you think that is? Why? What is your opinion on that?
I think, well, because the players, a lot of them enlisted.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, like Joe DiMaggio, never really saw combat, but he was more a figurehead. So he would play in these relief games hosted by Red Cross to boost the morale. And so when you have nothing, I've been overseas many times, deployed 3 times. And when you're over there, your mind thinks and you conjure up things. When you're over there, you have nothing else to do. So over there, when you do have downtime, baseball was it. That was your way of escaping. So I think it was in 42 and 43 when they started going out and building all these diamonds stateside, and then eventually, mainly through Europe, is a lot of the services didn't know the dimensions of the baseball diamond. But they didn't know how to create it. So who did Major League Baseball send that knew the baseball diamond the most? The groundskeepers.
Yeah.
So you're building a diamond behind the base, and so yeah, like you saw in Band of Brothers at the end, they're playing baseball. It's just that connection. They see this celebrity Joe DiMaggio, who's now in the Army, so automatically you're an Army fan, and now he's playing baseball, and now you put those two together when you're 19, 20 years old, and now you're 60. That becomes a great memory for you, no matter how short it was. And so for me, that's how you would tie baseball to that, because you hit them when they were 19, 20, when they had nothing else to think about but home and baseball. And they get home, and home is there, but baseball's always been there. So that's what I think.
I agree with you 100%. I think, you know, and it was very prevalent in the Pacific too. One of the first things the 1st Marine Division did after they got back from Peleliu was build a baseball diamond on Pavuvu on their rest island. And they named it after a captain who was killed in action on Peleliu named Haldane. They call it Andrew Haldane. They called it Haldane Field. And part of that was to keep the Marines busy, obviously, because, I mean, on Pavuvu there was nothing but crabs and rats and lizards and Marines. And it was to keep them busy. But it was also, in my opinion, it was to keep them connected with home.
Yep.
And I'm basically parroting what you said. And it was to keep them connected with home. And it was something that not all of them by any means. I mean, somebody who was born and raised in, you know, the middle of nowhere, Kansas, probably wasn't too familiar with the New York Yankees. I'm just guessing. You know, yeah, they might have read about them in the paper. They might have heard a few games on the radio, but they didn't follow them as closely as somebody from Brooklyn, or they would have followed the Dodgers, wouldn't they? but it was a tangible piece of Americana for those people who were in literally the farthest flung regions of the world, where there was nothing at all. They were lucky if they got a Coke, and this was that tangible touch of home. And for people that were so far away from everything, I think it was vital to their mental survival, really, because you're in such a foreign place, and this is the one thing that's familiar to you.
I would agree totally with what you said, Seth, but also it's kind of an easy sport to recreate. Yes, you have to have dimension. It doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, you know, it's easier than
Sandlot baseball,
basketball or football or whatever. So playing baseball there's also this easiness. Unfortunately, you guys didn't have soccer. That would have been even easier, but it was baseball.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say is taking it further back as to why baseball. It could have been basketball. Basketball is kind of a particularly American sport as well, but as
it's hard
Christelle
to play
said,
on the beach. It's hard to play.
But also, as you said, Christelle, is that anybody can organize a baseball game.
Yeah.
Kids played baseball in the streets. You just needed, this was going to be first base. You know, you could set it up geographically in your backyard or in an open field or in a street. And I think that's part of it, is that kids, that's what they played. And not even organized at an organized level. It was just a neighborhood thing. And so it was so ingrained.
Still
yeah, and it goes back to just, it's like you said, it's an easy sport to pick up and play wherever you are. And
you can just throw and catch. I mean, just doing that, it's
It's American, and
Yeah.
it's it's as American as hot dogs and apple pie.
But I think this movie, though, lets women know it's okay. Because they did it before. It's okay to love baseball. Because it was loved before. This is just, I believe this movie was a reminder. It's like, hey, we did this before. And for the people that caught it at that moment, like, yeah, you're right. And then in another 30 years, maybe they'll do it again. And so it's a good reminder of that, because by now that generation has changed. So the baby boomers are becoming the parents, and now they have children. Now you kind of lose that history and transition, and then it comes at a perfect time to go, boom. Hey, you remember this? My mother did this, or my grandmother did this. Like, oh, yeah, and it kind of lets them know it's okay that not everything is off limits. Women can do baseball just as much as men can.
Yeah. Softball was wildly popular in my hometown growing up. I played one season, and I mean, it was just, there were so many girls' leagues, so many girls played, so many girls. I had a lot of friends that played competitively, and there were competition teams that would travel around the state and other states and play. And I think that for us, it was kind of, this movie came out when we were all very young, and you wonder if that's a coincidence.
Yeah, I mean, it made an impact on me. That's why I kept researching and looking, and that's when I found out about this. I was really excited because this was a part of my childhood. I knew about it.
Well, one of the characters in this movie, and is my favorite character in this movie, is played by Tom Hanks.
Yes.
Jimmy Dugan. He was based on a real guy. Well, there's things that say he was based on two people, really, Hack Wilson and Jimmy Fox. And if you read anything about Jimmy Fox, in my opinion, he was based on Jimmy Fox. But the girls' teams, the four girls' teams, they were, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody here at this table, but they were managed by men. They were all four managed. And it may have changed as the league went on.
It did over the years.
But initially, from what you see in this movie, they were all managed by men. And some of them, well, all of them were connected to Major League Ball in one way, shape, or form. Jimmy Fox, actually, the guy who Tom Hanks' character was modeled after, did manage one of these girls' baseball teams for only a year, I think, in the early 50s. But that's kind of unique, I think, and that they had men managing these girls' baseball teams. And I mean, the reasons for that could be many. I mean, not the least of which is that they would have had professional experience. But Jimmy Dugan's character is Tom Hanks' character, Jimmy Dugan, is definitely, he's a polarizing figure in this movie. He's funny, but he's also very abrasive, too. And how accurate do you think the depiction of Jimmy is in terms of, what it would have been like?
I've read about some of the coaches. There was one in particular that was not liked among the girls because he had a really mean style of coaching, and that no nonsense, calling them names, screaming and yelling at them. So it absolutely, I think, is indicative of the way some of the guys coach these teams.
Well, I think, excuse me,
go ahead.
I think he's also representative of the first initial reaction, which is, you're not a real team because only guys can play baseball, basically.
I don't have ball players, I have girls.
That's exactly that. And I think he's the stand-up person for this opinion among, broad opinion among Americans. And then again, like hopefully the rest of America, he grew into recognizing some of their athletic abilities. And if not, he's a player. I mean, the role, he's a player at heart and he wants to win. If you ever played any game, you're competitive. And so now he's in charge, he's the head of his team, and he wants them to win. So, but it's interesting as a character development. It's probably the only one that's halfway developed in the movie. I think the other characters are kind of more.
Well, because each team, unlike Major League Baseball, the players don't care whether or not the team makes money. Whereas in this league it does because it ensures a survival. So you need almost like a manager of actual resources and somebody that is organized. For a lot of years, Babe Ruth, after he retired, tried his best to become a manager. And no team wanted him because he was a terrible manager of life. I mean, he was. And so no team wanted him because they're like, he can't manage. But he had a name. And so that's where when they said, remember he says, go out there, wave your hat.
Wave your little hat.
Yeah.
So that's where that theme of if you have a man in charge, then it makes managing the team easier. If, for example, remember when I get thrown off the bus and he's like, well, where did he go? Who's Lou? And he goes up and he can drive the bus. I'm not saying that women couldn't, but it was like they went to the man, and that's where kind of that might have added to it. But that was another great scene too.
Oh yeah, I loved you in The Wizard of Oz.
You beautiful stack of pancakes, you.
So many great lines from that one. Well, did you guys, Patrick? I'll start with you because I started with Kaylee. Did you like this movie, and would you recommend it?
I did. I would recommend it. It opens the portal to, if you want to know more. It's a good like appetizer. Like if you really want to know more, dig like we did. But yeah, I would recommend. I can't stop laughing. I mean, I watched it again last night for probably the 12th time. I still find things that just make me laugh. So yeah, I would recommend it.
John Lovitz is underappreciated in this film. We could have used more.
Absolutely. Kaylee, what about you?
I'd absolutely recommend it. I think it really is a classic. One of the things you see people say is it's feminist and funny, and it is, and it's feminist to a degree without being in your face, and I think it is inspiring. It's nice to see these. I think some of the characters do change and grow. I think you see a little bit of that, especially Doris. You know, she talks about, I'm with this guy because he's the only one that would have anything to do with me and treats me like I'm normal because I play baseball. And she has a little flock of admirers by the end of the film. But I think it does show young girls that, hey, you can play sports, be a woman. You can be a woman and play sports, and it's okay. And it was okay then, and it's okay now. And I think it's a fantastic film.
Christelle?
I would agree. I would recommend it. I said previously on this podcast that I hated it when they framed the movie. You know, they have a scene that's detached from the movie, and they had that in this one, and I think in this case it worked really well. So I'm going, hey, I'm admitting, 99% of the case I think they're horrible. This one I liked. Not the beginning. It was a little kitschy, but at the end, going to the museum, the Hall of Fame museum, and have the actual player be there and, seeing their face. I thought that was very well done. I think he brought it to, this is not just a fictional film. This is a real story. Those are real women. They broke barriers. They did something, they set the stage for, pushing whatever, the so-called glass ceiling. And so I like that they had that at the end. And as Patrick said, it makes you want to read more.
It served as a good epilogue to the movie, too, because you find out what happens, well, theoretically, you find out what happens to some of these people. Some of them passed away, like Evelyn and Jimmy Dugan, guys like that, they passed away. But I agree with all of you guys. I love this movie. It's hysterical. It's a funny movie. It's a good movie. It's a movie that whenever it's on TV, I watch it. I would definitely recommend it. If you want a history lesson, not really, no. But if you want to watch a good, entertaining film, yeah, absolutely. This movie is a classic. It's a great movie. And, I watch it every time it comes on. So final thoughts. Kaylee, can you sum this up in a sentence or two?
It's a fun film about women who are given a chance and they take it and they make the most of it and they change the world in a way. And they really do.
Pat?
If you ever have a conversation about baseball, you would have to kind of know a little bit about it because some of the lines that only people that know about baseball would use come from this movie. And so I would say it would be a requirement if you were a fan of baseball.
Give us an example. What kind of line?
Oh,
There's
of course.
No crying in baseball.
Yeah, exactly. No
Yes,
crying in
yes,
baseball.
yes.
There's, I'm trying to think of another one that you can't. I can't not.
Umpire insults.
Yeah.
Well, even like if you're playing on a team and somebody's playing terribly, he goes, maybe you should go play for the All-American Girls Baseball League instead of playing for the Major League team. Like that type of, it's like an insult, but it's not, if that makes sense. Because you're playing with the girls' league because you're not playing well with our league.
That is so sexist. There's no way you can turn that around and it's going to be a positive
I'm just
thing.
telling you that
It's like you throw like a girl.
Well,
no, they do underhand.
Christelle, what about you?
Very enjoyable film, as Kelly said. It's funny. It's also depict one of those historical moments that are not shown. It talks about the home front and it's talks about the role of women. And I think, especially with Patrick here, the role of sports during that time period, which is often when we think about the war period, we don't think about sports and the importance it had, not only in the home front, but also for soldiers.
Yep, absolutely. Very, 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 very true. As that sports did play an important, and still does.
Yeah.
They still do, rather do to this day, and that sports play a very big role in everybody's lives, really. I mean, whether you play them or not, you know, and I mean, I could cite several examples, not the least of which is 2006 in the city of New Orleans with the Saints.
You go back a little,
Hurricane Katrina.
Go back a little further. 01. I mean, the very next day after the attack, and then of course it was the big game and the flag, and it's baseball.
It's uniting.
Yeah,
It really is.
If you ask people to talk about themselves, you know, they might say, I'm from this city, and it might not be the first thing they're going to say, but they say, my team is. And the conversation is going to come up. I'm a fan of X. Like, you identify as belonging to a certain group with which team you support or you cheer on.
Well, after the Saints won the Super Bowl, and I used to travel a lot for the museum, I'd always introduce myself, and I'd say, I'm Seth Paradin, and they'd say, where are you from? I'm from New Orleans, the home of the world champion New Orleans Saints. Who dat?
You see, second thing he said.
All right, well, at the end of these podcasts, I usually try to pull a line from the film that I find particularly evocative or meaningful in some way to the conversation we just had. And this film is no different. So in closing, I'd just like to say, and I quote, avoid the clap, Jimmy Dugan.
That's good advice.
Indeed it is, Patrick. Indeed it is. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to hear more about the events we discussed today, listen to our mini episode next week where we will share oral histories from our collection. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Service on Celluloid. Be sure to rate and review us on iTunes if you like what you hear. I'd like to thank everyone who made this podcast possible. Our producer, Tessa Jager, and our sound engineer, Jeremy Burson. This has been a production of the National World War II Museum.